I only wanted to cook you something special.
You can do that on bed.
Jasmine Reed stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her tiny bathroom, the one with the cracked corner she'd been meaning to fix for 8 months, and assessed herself with the critical eye of a woman who had exactly 45 minutes to transform her life. She looked good. She always looked good. That was simultaneously her greatest asset and the universe's cruelest joke, because looking like a walking editorial spread for Vogue while applying for a housekeeping position was the kind of irony that could make a grown woman cry. But she didn't cry. She'd somehow accepted her reality. She adjusted her box braids instead, thick, neat, perfectly installed last week during the last of her savings, and tilted her head. The braids fell past her shoulders in a dark, glossy curtain, each one uniform and precise, the kind of work that took her stylist 6 hours. Jasmine had been told more than once that her braids were distracting. She'd been told her hourglass figure was distracting. She'd even been told her cheekbones, sharp enough to cut glass, her mama always said were distracting. Everything about Jasmine Reed's was apparently a distraction. She smoothed the front of her crisp white button-down shirt, tucked it into her high-waisted black trousers, and decided she looked like exactly what she was. A woman with a degree in hospitality management, 5 years of impeccable references, and a bank account that had recently achieved a net worth of negative $43. "You've got this," she told her reflection. Her reflection looked skeptical. "I said, you've got this," she repeated, not even believing a word she just said. Her phone buzzed. Her best friend Tanya's text appeared. "Girl, if you don't get this job, I'm buying you a one-way ticket to my cousin's couch in Atlanta. You've been warned. Also, you look stunning. I'm manifesting for you." Jasmine smiled despite herself. Tanya couldn't actually see her. She just sent that last part as a general principle, which was somehow more touching. She grabbed her bag, her folder of references, and her dignity, all 3 of which she would need today, and walked out the door to interview for the position of live-in housekeeper to one Benjamin Choi. Billionaire, CEO of Choi Global Enterprises, Korean-American, 34 years old, and reportedly, according to the staffing agency's quietly terrified office manager, very particular with his services. Very particular in staffing agency language, Jasmine had learned over the years, meant one of 2 things. Either the client had a minor but manageable quirk, preferred the towels folded in thirds, required silence before 9 a.m., or the client was a full-blown nightmare human being who had gone through 17 housekeepers in 3 years and was currently facing a class action lawsuit from his cleaning staff. She was hopping for the towel thing. The Choi estate, because house was entirely the wrong word for it, sat at the end of a private drive in one of Seattle's most aggressively exclusive neighborhoods, tucked behind iron gates that looked like they'd been imported directly from a 19th-century French chateau. The grounds were immaculate. The architecture was modern and severe, all clean lines and steel and glass, the kind of building that didn't apologize for itself. Jasmine appreciated that. She pressed the intercom button at the gate and gave her name. There was a pause, a very long pause, long enough that she began mentally composing a backup plan, and then slowly, out of nowhere, the gates swung open without a word. A man met her at the front door. He was slight, somewhere in his 50s, with reading glasses and the expression of someone who had already seen too much for his age. He introduced himself as Mr. Park, the estate's personal assistant. "Ms. Reed's," he said, with a slight bow that she returned instinctively. "Thank you for coming. Please follow me." He led her through an entryway that was probably larger than her entire apartment, past a curved staircase that swept upward in a breathtaking arc, past walls hung with art she recognized, actual, original art, not prints, and into a sitting room that managed to be both massive and somehow intimate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a perfectly manicured garden. "Mr. Choi will be with you shortly," Mr. Park said. "Can I get you anything? Water, tea?" "I'm fine, thank you," Jasmine said, because she was not about to risk spilling anything in this room. Mr. Park nodded and left. Jasmine sat down, back straight, folder on her lap, and waited. She waited for 3 minutes, then 5, then 10. At At the 12-minute mark, she heard footsteps. And then Benjamin Choi walked into the room. In that exact moment, Jasmine, who had spent the better part of her adult life being unimpressed by men, experienced something entirely new. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, somewhere over 6 feet, with the kind of lean, precise build that suggested discipline rather than vanity. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him with the accuracy of a second skin, no tie, collar open at the throat, and his dark hair was slightly disheveled in a way that was either carefully calculated or genuinely accidental, and either option said something unsettling about him. His face was the real problem. It was the kind of face that belonged in a different tax bracket than mere attractiveness. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that seemed built for things it probably shouldn't say, and eyes, dark, assessing, intelligent, that landed on her with the focused precision of a man who wasted nothing, including his attention. He was, in the most inconvenient possible way, devastating. He also looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days and was furious about it. Ms. Reed's, he called her name. It wasn't even a question. Rather, it sounded like an identification. Mr. Choi, she replied and stood. Thank you for seeing me. He didn't respond to that. He sat down across from her with no interest in pleasantries, then picked up what she assumed was her resume from the side table. He read it in silence. She watched him read it in silence. It was the most professionally charged 40 seconds of her life. I see, you spent 5 years with the Hartwell family, he said finally. Yes. They gave you an excellent reference. I did excellent work, sir. He glanced up. Something flashed between those dark, intelligent eyes. It looked like something she couldn't name. She was still processing it when he fired the next question. Why did you leave? The family relocated to London. I have roots here. Roots, he repeated, as if the word was foreign to him. What roots? My mother is here. My community is here. I didn't want to leave. He set the resume down. What are your feelings about dogs? Jasmine blinked. I like dogs. What about a dog that has destroyed 3 sofas, 2 Persian rugs, and 1 irreplaceable piece of Josian-era pottery? She kept her face carefully neutral. I'd say that dog has strong opinions about interior design. Another one of those strange expressions crossed his face. His name is Kimchi. He's a Great Dane. He weighs more than most adults and has the impulse control of a toddler on a sugar high. My previous housekeepers found him challenging. I'm not easily challenged. Everyone says that until they meet Kimchi and run, she finished pleasantly. Yes, usually within the first week. He leaned back, studying her. You're very confident for someone who needs this job. I don't need it, she said, which was a lie so bold it practically sang. I want it. There's a difference. I want it because I'm good at what I do and I can see this household needs someone who actually knows what they're doing. But I won't grovel if that's what you're waiting for. The silence that followed was the longest silence of Jasmine's professional life. Then Benjamin Choi said, You start Monday. Wait, before we continue, can I ask you something real quick? I'm trying to figure out where people who love good stories are watching from these days. Are you team phone in bed, team laptop at work, or team living room TV? Drop a comment and let me know what team you are and where in the world you're watching this story from. I will personally reply to every single comment in the first hour. Hit that like and subscribe button. Now, let's proceed. Monday arrived with the kind of cheerful Seattle sunshine that felt personally ironic, and Jasmine showed up at the Choi estate at precisely 8 a.m. with 2 suitcases, a box of her own cleaning supplies, because she had standards, and a mental list of everything she needed to assess in her first 24 hours. Mr. Park let her in. He showed her to her quarters first, a suite that was larger and significantly nicer than any apartment she'd ever rented, with a private bathroom, a sitting area, and windows that overlooked the garden. She was still processing this when she heard the galloping. It was the only word for it. Galloping. The sound of something enormous moving at speed, getting closer at an alarming rate, and she had approximately 2 seconds to register that before 90 kilograms of Great Dane came skidding around the corner and launched himself at her. Kimchi, Mr. Park started. Jasmine caught the dog. Not with grace, exactly. More with the reflexive competence of a woman who'd grown up with large cousins and no personal space. She braced, absorbed the impact, and got two giant paws on her shoulders and a very enthusiastic tongue licking her cheek before she managed to redirect him. "Hey," she said firmly, "down." Kimchi sat. They stared at each other. He was magnificent, steel gray, with a giant head and eyes that held the particular expression of a dog who knew exactly what he was doing. He panted at her with the self-satisfaction of someone who just tested her and was cautiously impressed by the results. "Good boy," Jasmine said. Kimchi thumped his tail against the floor like a drumbeat. Mr. Park was staring at her. He knocked the last housekeeper down the moment she walked through the door. "I'm harder to knock down than I look." Apparently, Mr. Park cleared his throat. Mr. Choi left a list. He handed her a document that was, she counted, 4 pages long. Single-spaced. The list was, to put it gently, a masterwork of specificity. Benjamin Choi had opinions about everything. The precise thread count of linens, nothing below 600. The temperature at which his coffee should be served, exactly 140 degrees Fahrenheit. He'd apparently measured. The organizational system for his home office, a system so complex it had a key at the bottom of the page. The exact schedule for Kimchi's walks, meals, and enrichment activities. And this was the one that made Jasmine stop and reread it, a full page dedicated to his kitchen. His kitchen had rules, many rules. The knives were Japanese and cost more than her car, former car, present tense no longer applicable. The pantry was organized by cuisine type, then alphabetically. Nothing was to be moved without explicit permission. The coffee machine was a La Marzocca that apparently required a specific technique she was expected to learn. And at the very bottom of the kitchen page, in a different font, as if he'd added it later, perhaps after careful reflection, was a single line. "Do not attempt to cook Korean food." Jasmine read that line 3 times. Then she walked to the kitchen, opened every cabinet with methodical calm, took a full inventory of what was there, assessed the state of the space, immaculate. She'd give him that, and began to understand the shape of her task. This wasn't a household. It was a fortress. Every system was defensive, every rule a wall, every instruction a boundary that said, "I have been disappointed before, and I will not be surprised again." She understood that energy. She didn't like it, but she understood it. She put on her apron, washed her hands, and got to work. Benjamin Choi arrived home at 7:14 p.m. She knew, because she'd already learned the sound of his car, and walked through the front door to a house that smelled different. Clean was the obvious one. But beyond that, organized, aired out, and faintly of the lemon verbena she'd used on the wood surfaces instead of the industrial cleaner she'd found under the sink, which had smelled like a chemical plant. He just stood there in the entryway. She was watching him from the upstairs landing, where she was finishing with the guest rooms, watched his body language as he slowly registered the changes in his house, the way a person registers something he hadn't expected to turn out unexpectedly right. He didn't say anything. He walked through the ground floor, and she went back to work. At 7:40, Mr. Park appeared at the guest room door. Mr. Choi would like his dinner at 8. "It'll be ready," Jasmine nodded. He has a preference for salmon, steamed, not baked, with rice and a simple vegetable. I found his food delivery records in the kitchen drawer. She smiled at Mr. Park's expression. "I read everything. It's part of the job." She made the salmon. She made it well. She plated it cleanly, set the dining room table with the precision the 4-page list demanded, and then she retreated to the kitchen to have her own dinner, because she was staff, and she was professional, and she was absolutely not going to make this weird by hovering. She heard him eat in silence from the dining room. Or rather, she heard the absence of complaint, which in her experience with employers of his type was the highest available compliment. She was washing up when he appeared in the kitchen doorway. She sensed his presence and turned, and saw him leaning against the frame with his jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, looking at her with an intensity he seemed to do effortlessly. "I noticed you used lemon verbena," he said. She waited. The previous cleaner, Use something that smelled like a chemical plant. I know. I found it and relocated it to the utility room. I won't use it in the living spaces. Another pause. She was beginning to suspect pauses were his primary language. The salmon was good. Thank you. He looked at her for another moment. You rearranged the pantry. She kept her expression calm. I noticed the system had some inefficiencies. I maintained your organizational categories but adjusted the placement for better flow. If you want me to restore it. No, he pushed off the doorframe. Leave it. And then he was gone, and Jasmine stood in the kitchen for a long moment and realized her heart was beating slightly faster than the situation warranted. She blamed the coffee machine. She'd had to make a test shot to calibrate the La Marzocca, and clearly the espresso had been stronger than she'd planned. Clearly. By the end of her first week, Jasmine had developed a comprehensive understanding of Benjamin Choi, but had absolutely no idea who Benjamin Choi really was. This was a paradox she turned over at night, in the large, comfortable bed in her suite, while Kimchi snored on the floor beside her, a habit she'd neither encouraged nor had any apparent ability to stop. Professionally, she knew him well. He woke at 5:30. She knew because his alarm, though quiet, carried through the house in the early morning silence. He ran for 45 minutes. He showered. He was in his home office by 7. He had a standing video call with his sole office every morning that lasted exactly 1 hour and never a minute longer. He ate lunch at his desk. She left it outside his door, because she'd tried bringing it in on day 2 and the look he'd given her had communicated, without words, that this was a boundary she was not allowed to cross. He left the house by 11 most mornings for his downtown office, returned between 7 and 8 in the evening, ate dinner, worked for another hour or 2, and was in bed by 11. His schedule was a precision instrument. Everything about his professional life was ordered, controlled, efficient. His personal life was a different story. The personal life, Jasmine was discovering, was not so much a life as it was a series of locked rooms. There were no personal photos anywhere in the house, not one. There were no books with cracked spines, suggesting rereading. His wardrobe was immaculate and impersonal, a rotation of dark suits and white shirts that could have belonged to any of 1,000 powerful men. There was no evidence of hobbies, of friendships, of the kind of small domestic accumulation that turns a house into a home. The only exception was Kimchi. The dog usually slept in Benjamin's room, she knew because she cleaned it, and from the worn patch on the right side of the king-sized bed, it was clear Kimchi didn't just visit, he occupied. There was a dog bed never used, a collection of toys in a basket beside the wardrobe, carefully maintained, and on Benjamin's nightstand, a single photograph. Jasmine had looked at it, because it was her job to dust the nightstand, and she was not going to pretend she was blind. A younger Benjamin, still striking, perhaps 19 or 20, standing with an older woman who had the same jaw, the same assessing eyes, but a warmth in her expression that was radically different from anything Jasmine had seen on his face. His mother, probably. The photo was handled, slightly worn at the edges, in a way that none of his other possessions were. She dusted around it carefully and said nothing. On Wednesday of her second week, she broke one of the rules. Not intentionally, though. She'd thought about it, weighed it, and decided that the rule in question was stupid, and she was going to break it in service of the household's greater good. The rule, the kitchen staff, currently just her, plus a twice-weekly cleaning crew she supervised, was not to engage Mr. Choi in non-work-related conversation unless spoken to first. The occasion was that. She walked into the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning to start coffee and found Benjamin Choi sitting at the kitchen island with his head in his hands, in the particular posture of a man who has not slept and is losing a private war with himself. She stood in the doorway for a moment. He hadn't heard her. Kimchi in the corner looked at her with large, calm eyes and said nothing, which she appreciated in a dog. She walked to the coffee machine. She made coffee, his, first, set it in front of him, and then made her own. She sat down at the opposite end of the island, wrapped both hands around her mug, and looked out the window at the garden, where the early morning light was doing something genuinely beautiful to the hydrangeas she'd had installed last week. She'd submitted the request through Mr. Park. It had been approved without comment. She didn't look at him. She didn't speak. She simply was there. After 3 minutes, he said, "The soul deal fell through." She turned her head. He was looking at his coffee. "I'm sorry," she said. 6 months of work. His voice was even, controlled, but beneath it was something worn down to the bone. "That's brutal," she said, and didn't add anything to it, didn't offer solutions or silver linings or the kind of reflexive comfort people offered when they didn't know what else to do. She just let it be what it was. He looked up then, really looked at her, in a way that was different from his usual assessments. This time it felt like he saw her as a person and not as a mere staff. "You're not supposed to be in here until 7. You're not supposed to be sitting in the dark at 6:30 looking like the world ended," she replied. "And yet here we are." Another one of those expressions. "I see, you're very direct. You hired me for competence, not compliance. I hired you to manage my household. This is part of the household." She gestured loosely at him. "The household functions best when you function. You function better with coffee and 5 minutes of quiet before whatever conference call is going to eat your morning." She stood, taking her mug. "So, you're welcome." She walked back toward the door. "Ms. Reed's." She turned. "The hydrangeas," he said, "in the garden." She waited. "My mother likes them." She held his gaze for a moment, although she didn't understand what he meant that his mother liked her flowers. She hasn't seen any family members since she started working here. Jasmine swallowed her questions, simply nodded once and left him to his coffee. Her name was Vivienne Lau, and she arrived on a Thursday evening like a weather event. Jasmine opened the door to find a woman in her early 30s, stunningly beautiful in the particular way of someone who had weaponized her beauty into a professional instrument, wearing a cream-sheath dress and heels that added 6 unnecessary inches to her already considerable height. She had the polished confidence of someone who was used to being admired and told she's beautiful each time she walked into a room. "I'm Vivienne," she said, with a clipped tone that communicated that she wasn't expecting any additional questions. "Benjamin is expecting me." "Of course," Jasmine said, with a warm smile that cost her nothing. "Come in, please. Mr. Choi is in his study. I'll let him know you're here." She showed Vivienne to the sitting room and went a knock on Benjamin's office door. He answered immediately, which meant he'd been sitting right on the other side of it, which also meant he'd heard the doorbell when Vivienne arrived, but somehow hadn't moved an inch. Interesting. "Ms. Lau is here," Jasmine announced quietly. An expression moved across his face. It wasn't enthusiasm. "Okay." He straightened his jacket. "Thank you." "Should I serve drinks in the sitting room?" "Yes," he paused. "Serve whatever she wants, sparkling water for me." She went to prepare the drinks. She was not, she told herself firmly, paying attention to the particular set of his shoulders as he walked toward the sitting room. She was not cataloging the slight tightening around his eyes that he couldn't quite control. She was absolutely not noticing any of this. She brought the drinks in, set them with precision, and was leaving when she caught Vivienne watching her with cold eyes, sizing her up. "You're very poised for a housekeeper," Vivienne said, in a condescending manner. Jasmine turned at the door and gave her the smile she reserved for people who try to intimidate her, and then finds out that they've made a very big mistake. "Thank you. That's exactly the skill set Mr. Choi is paying for." She looked at Benjamin. "Will you be needing anything else?" His mouth curved slightly, like he was somehow impressed and didn't want to show it. "No, thank you, Ms. Reed's." She nodded, then turned and left quietly. Jasmine headed straight to the kitchen, made herself a cup of tea, and thought very hard about why she was annoyed with Miss Vivienne. She was just a guest who would leave soon. Why get unnecessarily annoyed, though? This was unlike her. And she didn't like the answer that kept swirling in her thoughts. Vivienne stayed for 2 hours. She left in the same way she'd arrived, her heels noisy as she walked. And Jasmine, who was no longer even pretending to do anything useful, had been sitting in the kitchen with a book she wasn't reading, when she heard the front door close and then nothing for a long moment. Then Benjamin appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked tired, not the bone tired of the soul deal collapse, something different. He looked like a man who had agreed to something long ago, but currently wasn't interested anymore. "Can I get you anything?" Jasmine asked. "No," He leaned against the doorframe that was becoming a signature of his, she'd noticed, leaning, as if he needed the architecture to hold him upright. She's the third one this year. Jasmine set her book down. Third one. Third woman my parents have arranged for me to meet. He said it with the flatness of a man reading from a script he finds tedious. They're very invested in my settling down. Jasmine considered this. And you're not. I'm invested in running a company. He looked at her. What about you? She blinked. What about me? Do you have someone? It was such an unexpectedly human question from him, so stripped of the professional distance he usually maintained, that she answered it honestly before she could stop herself. No, not anymore. He didn't ask further, but he also didn't leave. He just stood there, watching her intently in a way that she strangely found thrilling and uncomfortable at the same time. What the heck was he thinking? She looks like she's accomplished, Jasmine offered, because she felt she should. To break the tense atmosphere at least. Enormously, he nodded in agreement. And pretty too, she added. Objectively, yes. But what's wrong? He looked at her for a long moment. I noticed she looked around this house and saw an asset, he said finally, not a home. Jasmine felt something twist in her chest that she wasn't going to examine. I'm sorry, she said simply. He pushed off the doorframe. It's not your fault. Good night, Ms. Reeds. Good night, Mr. Choi. She listened to his footsteps go up the stairs. Kimchi materialized from somewhere, rested his giant head in her lap, and looked at her with the solemn wisdom of a dog who understood the whole situation completely. Gosh, you're so adorable, Jasmine told him. Kimchi wagged his tail with pleasure, licking her hand in a way that made her giggle delightedly. Hold on, I have to ask you this right now, because the comments last time were incredible. Are you team phone in bed, team laptop at work, or team living room TV? And I really want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your time zone. I don't care, I just love knowing you're out there. I'll reply to every single comment in the first hour. That's a promise. Like, subscribe, you know what to do. Now let's get back to Jasmine, because things are about to get interesting. The thing about living with someone, genuinely living with them, sharing their space, learning the rhythm of their days and the texture of their habits, is that it creates an intimacy that wasn't planned. Jasmine knew Benjamin Choi in the way she knew a house she'd lived in for years. The specific creak of the third stair, the way the morning light hit his study at 9:15 and made him squint, the fact that he kept a battered paperback copy of The Remains of the Day on his nightstand on the side where Kimchi didn't sleep, and that the spine was broken in 3 places from rereading. She knew he worked too hard and slept too little. She knew that when the soul stress was bad, he'd stand in the garden for 10 minutes before coming inside, and she'd started leaving the outdoor lights on so he wasn't standing in the dark. She knew he had a ruthless sweet tooth that he appeared to find personally embarrassing. She'd started leaving a small square of good dark chocolate on his desk beside his afternoon coffee, which he'd never acknowledged but had never left it uneaten. She knew all of this and told herself it was professional knowledge, that it was her job, that she was simply very good at her job. The problem was that, as days goes by, it was getting harder to explain certain other things as professional. Like the way she listened for his car now, not because she needed to prepare anything. She'd stopped needing that data point about a week in, but because she simply liked knowing he was home. Like the way her day organized itself, subtly and without her permission, around his presence in the house. Like the way she feels all warm and fuzzy in the pit of her stomach, each time he walked into whatever room she was in, particularly if he was wearing the dark charcoal suit she'd recently developed a soft spot for. You have it for your boss, so bad, Tanya teased, via phone at 11:30 on one night, while Jasmine was lying in her very comfortable bed, in her very nice suite and staring at the ceiling. Like, historically bad. I absolutely do not, Jasmine argued, rolling her eyes. You just described the way he drinks his coffee for 4 minutes. I was making a point about his dietary habits. Jasmine. He's my employer, Tanya. I know, but you've got a crush on him, girl. Admit it and be free. Tanya, she called out, feeling slightly annoyed. That's completely inappropriate and you know it. I know, So what are you going to do now? Nothing is going to happen between us. Mum, Tanya sounded like she was full of doubts. I'm really serious, Jasmine defended. All right, I believe you, Tanya said, in the tone of a woman who believed approximately none of it. I just think you should also be more honest with yourself about the fact that you straightened a grown man's tie this morning and then had a full internal crisis about it. I was walking past. The tie looked crooked. It was only a mere reflex. He let you do it. Think about that. He's an adult male, your boss, and he let you do it. Jasmine opened her mouth, then closed it. To her surprise, she had nothing to say. Go to sleep, Tanya. Only if you admit. Jasmine rolled her eyes and hung up, then stared at the ceiling for another 40 minutes. She'd remembered that incident vividly and didn't know why she'd told her best friend about it in the first place. The tie had been crooked, and she'd straightened it without thinking too much about it. Then, the moment her hands touched him, he'd gone very still. She literally heard him suck in breath, and she'd been so close that she'd smelled his cologne. It was something dark and clean with a cedar note that should be illegal. And when she'd smoothed his lapel and stepped back, he'd looked at her with a weird, intense expression that took her breath away. She could sense trouble, and that was why she confided in her best friend about it. Now that girl was using it to tease her. Typical Tanya. She smelled it before she heard anything. It was a Sunday morning, her usual day off, which in practice meant she stayed out of the main quarter but was technically available when called upon. Jasmine was on her bed, curled up with a book she'd been meaning to read, but hadn't found the time until now, when the smoke smell drifted under her door. She was instinctively on her feet and bounded towards the kitchen in less than 30 seconds. When she got there, Benjamin was standing at the stove with a confused expression, like a man deeply betrayed by physics. There was a pan on the burner with something in it that looked like they'd been eggs at some point. Right now, it was pitch black, charred, cracked across the surface, and literally smoking around the edges. He heard her come in and turned. His usual neutral expression wasn't there, instead he was anxious. It's the burner, he started, pointing at it while trying to explain. I believed. You had it on high, while inside a cast iron, Jasmine said, going straight to the stove and turning it off. Then she stood, assessing the damage. Were you trying to make scrambled eggs? Yes. On high heat. I thought. Really? Cast iron on high heat for scrambled eggs, she repeated, moving the pan, examining it. The pan is fine, which is a miracle, because cast iron is more forgiving than you deserve right now. He looked at the disaster that used to be eggs. I wasn't going to bother you. Well, it's my day off. Exactly my point. So instead of knocking on my door, Jasmine said, with a patience she was assembling from raw materials, you decided to solve this yourself, and the result is, whatever this is. I'm just finding out that I'm very capable of making eggs. You are obviously not, she helped him finish. He straightened, drawing himself to his full height. There was something almost comical about it, this powerful man in his Sunday clothes being confused about eggs, and she had to press her lips together to keep from smiling. I've made eggs before, he continued, not giving up. Where, at what temperature, with what pan? Give me the full context, please. She was genuinely curious, fighting hard to stifle her emotions. His mouth twitched. I usually have hotel kitchen staff do it for Myrrh. So you've never actually made eggs? I've supervised the making of eggs on many occasions. That's not the same thing, and you know it. She went to the fridge, took out more eggs. There were always more eggs. She'd learned this about the house and reached for a different pan, smaller, non-stick, the one she herself used. She turned on medium-low heat. Come here. He came to stand beside her, which put him close enough that she was exquisitely aware of exactly how much space he took up. I don't need a cooking lesson. You clearly do. She cracked an egg into a small bowl. Watch, medium-low heat, non-stick pan, butter not oil for scrambled. She added butter, let it melt gently, then poured in the beaten egg. And then you wait and you move it slowly and you do not walk away and answer your phone, which I'm assuming is what happened. I received an important message. From who? He paused. My mother. She glanced at him sideways. He was watching the eggs with the attention he usually reserved for quarterly reports. Your mother calls on Sunday mornings. Every Sunday at 8:15, without fail, for 34 years. Even when you were at the university. Yes, he nodded, even back then. Something in his voice was unguarded in a way she'd never heard from him before. It sounded like he was really fond of her. Jasmine smiled at the eggs. I like her already. She would like you, he said, and then went very still as if he hadn't meant to say it. Jasmine tried very hard to focus on the eggs, even though she wanted desperately to ask her, what does he mean when he said that his mum was going to like her? The eggs came out perfect, soft, barely set, and glossy. Jasmine could do this perfectly, even if she'd just woken from sleep. She then slid the eggs onto the plate she'd had warming in the oven because she thought of everything and handed it to him. Their fingers didn't touch. She'd made sure of that. Eat, she said, and went to make herself coffee. He sat at the kitchen island and ate the eggs. She stood at the counter with her coffee. And the kitchen was full of a weird kind of silence that neither of them commented on, because neither of them was ready for what commenting would mean. Something else happened. She hadn't meant to see him like that. She'd knocked. That was important. She had knocked, twice, before opening the door to his study to retrieve a coffee cup she'd left in there the previous day. She'd knocked, and there had been no response, and she'd gone in. He'd been in the corner of the study, the small sitting area she'd never seen him use, asleep. Fully, deeply asleep in the armchair, with Kimchi's massive head across his lap and a closed laptop on the side table. He was still wearing his work clothes, jacket discarded, shirt still buttoned though the collar was open, and he was entirely, completely defenseless. Jasmine stopped breathing. She had seen many versions of him at this point, the professional ice of morning meetings, the controlled exhaustion of late evenings, the reluctant version she'd seen in the kitchen, but she had never seen him without his armor on. And it turned out that without his armor. Benjamin Choi had a slightly more relaxed set to his shoulders, and his mouth was less guarded, and there was something young and undefended about him that made her chest ache in a way she was going to have serious words with herself about later. She slowly retrieved the cup, carefully moved the laptop to prevent it from falling. Then she gently, very gently, almost with the precision of someone defusing a bomb, draped the throw blanket from the back of the sofa over him, because the room was cool and he was going to be stiff cold when he woke up if not properly covered. Kimchi opened one eye at her. Jasmine leaned over and pressed a finger to her lips. He seems to change his mind about barking to wake Benjamin, then at the last minute. Kimchi closed his eyes. Satisfied with the order of this, Jasmine turned and left. She stood in the hallway for a moment with the coffee cup in her hand and told herself, sternly and with intention, that she was not in love with her employer. She was experiencing proximity-based fondness. It was normal. It was manageable. But it was absolutely not love. Her heart, which had its own opinions, declined to comment. Benjamin found the blanket when he woke up. He came to dinner that evening in a way that was slightly different, less guarded, more social and open. He sat at the dining table, and when she brought his food, he caught her hand. "Thank you," he whispered, in a way that made her inside melt. "Of course," she replied, struggling to act normal. He released her and she escaped back to the kitchen. "I need a +1. Jasmine looked up from the linen inventory she was updating. Benjamin was in the doorway of the utility room, his new habit, apparently, with the expression of a man asking something he considered mildly beneath him, but had concluded was necessary. "Excuse me," she paused. "The Choi Foundation Gala is Saturday. I typically bring a date. My parents expect me to." He stopped, carefully selecting his words. "My usual option is unavailable. You would be doing me a favor." Jasmine set down her tablet. "You want me to be your date to a gala?" "My +1, not a date," he corrected politely. "That's the same thing." "I believe it's different." "Is it really?" She folded her arms and considered him. He looked slightly anxious, which manifested on him as a slight tightening around the jaw. She took a perverse and completely human pleasure in it. "Would I be there as your employee?" "You'd be there as my guest." "And what does that mean, exactly?" "It means," he said, with the careful precision of a man who had thought this through, "that you'd be attending as Jasmine Reeds, not as my housekeeper." She looked at him for a long moment. "This is a terrible idea," she said. "Probably." "I want a real answer. Do not strategically deflect," she mounted pressure. His mouth curved slightly into a smug smile. "Look, I understand that this is an unconventional request," he continued, "from an employer who has perhaps been less than conventional since the day we met. If you are not comfortable, you can go ahead and say no. I will understand." She stared at him, processing the entire situation. Then she breathed, "Okay, what would I wear?" His expression lit up. "I will get someone to bring in options." "Options," she repeated. "Yes." "From where?" "From wherever you want," he said casually, like a man who isn't fazed by a huge budget. "Name a designer." She named one, mostly to watch his face, and when he just nodded and took out his phone, she realized that she was really going to a gala with her billionaire employer, and she was going to wear a piece from one of her dream designers. Tears of joy almost glistened in her eyes. "Ms. Reeds," he called, unaware what was going on inside her. "Yes," she slowly glanced up. "Thank you," he said, softly like he really meant it. She looked back down at her work, in a bid to distract herself, because if she kept looking at him, she was going to do something she wouldn't be proud of. "I'll be ready." The dress situation was a lot. There was no other word to describe it. 3 stylists arrived Friday afternoon with racks of clothes, and for 2 hours, Jasmine had the distinctly surreal experience of trying on elegant and stylish evening, wear in the guest suite while a small, intensely opinionated French woman named Colette said things like, "Non, non, this swallows you, you have too much figure for this." And yes, this one, "Yes, your body is magnificent, you must not hide your curves." Jasmine was used to her body. She'd had it her whole life. The hourglass curves her mother called the Reed's legacy, and her aunt called a gift from God, because of the way clothes usually surrendered to her shape, hugging every inch of her curves tightly. The dress Colette settled on was black, deep black, elegantly beaded with a structured bodice and a slit that showed off her thighs unapologetically whenever she moved. The box braids were pinned up in a high, elegant arrangement that Colette referred to as magnifique and touched reverently. Small gold earrings. Nothing else, she needed nothing else. She was truly magnificent. She looked at herself in the mirror and felt, for the first time in months, like the version of herself she'd lost somewhere around the time money ran out. "He will lose his mind," Colette said gleefully with professional satisfaction. "You may quote me any time." Jasmine laughed softly. "Let's not jinx it." Benjamin was in the entryway when she came downstairs, and she watched his reaction from the top of the staircase, the moment he registered her presence, his eyes tracking down her entire body, taking her in at the same time. She could swear she saw him suck in his breath in disbelief. He was in black tie. Of course it was a black tie event. What else could he possibly wear? But he was standing there, looking effortlessly handsome that it wrecked her little heart in places it shouldn't. He was her freaking boss, Jasmine reminded herself, in case she was developing amnesia. She finally reached the bottom of the stairs. He stood there, dumbfounded, staring at her in moments slightly longer than appropriate. His gaze sent delicious warmth all over her body, making heat pull between her legs. "You look," he stuttered. "So amazing," he managed to say, looking distracted as he continued staring at her with so much intensity. "You look amazing, too." She returned the compliment, fighting the reaction his intense dark eyes had on her. He recovered from the daze and slowly offered his arm. Jasmine took it. Kimchi watched them go from the entryway, barking gleefully like he wanted to follow them. The gala was held at a venue in downtown Seattle that had been transformed into something genuinely breathtaking. The kind of event that reminded you how much money some people had and how gracefully they could spend it. The Choi Foundation Gala raised funds for youth arts education, which Jasmine filed away as another piece of the Benjamin Choi puzzle she was perpetually assembling. They walked in together, and she felt the room adjust. It was subtle, like a redirect of attention, unspoken, but it was there. It felt like the kind of scenario that usually happened in rooms like this when a person of significance arrived with someone unexpected. She'd spent enough time in proximity to power to recognize it, and she'd spent enough time in her own skin to know how to carry it. And Jasmine carried herself so well. She always did. She met his business partners with the ease of someone born to dazzle in rooms like this, charmed his foundation board members with a warmth that was genuine rather than pretense, and spent 20 minutes in conversation with his foundation director, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Chen, who was refreshingly direct about arts education funding, because Jasmine actually had opinions about arts education funding. Having grown up in a school district that cut its entire arts program the year she was supposed to take photography, Benjamin was watching her from across the room when she looked up from the conversation. Without being told, she could sense that he wasn't starring in the casual way he usually did as her employer. This time it felt different. She could feel it deep inside her gut. Tonight, Benjamin Choi was staring at her in a way a man looks at a woman he found interesting, and he had been so lost in thought watching her for a while that he didn't even realize that she was looking back. She raised an eyebrow. Then he smiled and slowly crossed the room towards her. Dr. Chen seems impressed. He leaned in, whispering softly in her ear as he came to stand beside her. Dr. Chen is impressive, Jasmine beamed. I like her already. I think you should give her a bigger budget if you're feeling generous. I'll consider it. No, you should actually do it. She has 3 programs that are under-resourced, and she's keeping them alive through sheer force of will, which is admirable but not sustainable. She looked at him. You have the money. I'm aware of what I have. Good. Could you kindly use it better? She smiled to take the edge off the order and watched something flicker in his expression as he stared down at her. You've got some spine, and it makes you extraordinary, he said, quietly like he was just realizing it against his initial judgment. The gala continued around them. The string quartet played a splendid sound she recognized, but couldn't name. She thought about all the professional lines between them and the way the distance was getting harder to maintain. Don't, she said very quietly. Don't what? Don't say things like that, and then go back to being my employer in the morning. He went quiet, studying her for a moment. Then, what if I don't want to go back? She gasped softly, feeling like the entire gala somehow faded out, and it was just the two of them. What was he trying to insinuate? Benjamin, she called quietly, and realized to her shock that it was the first time she'd ever used his name. He smiled and said softly, Jasmine. It was the first time he'd called hers outside of the context of work, and the way it sounded in his voice knocked her breathless, sending warmth down her spine. We should get back to the table, she whispered, trying to maintain some decency in this new terrain they were crossing. Yes, we should, he agreed. But neither of them moved immediately. They both stood there, staring at each other and completely lost in each other's eyes. He lifted his finger and made a mover to rub her lower lip. Then someone called his name from across the room, a business associate or a senator or even someone sent to wreck them, and in that instant, the magical moment broke. Benjamin pulled her along as they both went back to the table, and Jasmine spent the rest of the evening doing an excellent job at avoiding his eyes. Although she could feel them on her anyway, throughout the entire night. The drive home was 30 minutes in light traffic. They were in his car, a sleek, dark luxury car driven by a driver whose discretion was apparently guaranteed, both contract and temperament, and Jasmine sat beside Benjamin in the back seat. She made sure to leave precisely the right amount of space between them, even though she could feel every inch of him in such close distance. They didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. You told Dr. Chen I'm going to fund 3 new programs, he said finally, breaking the chilling silence. She nodded slowly. I asked you to fund 3 new programs. I only suggested to Dr. Chen that you were going to. He stared at her in disbelief. You committed my money without consulting me, and... You have $7 billion, she continued. And Dr. Chen's programs are changing kids' lives. I'm sorry, but yes, I kind of told her that she was going to get the funds. You can be annoyed about the process while writing the check. The silence between them felt different this time. Jasmine knew she was treading on thin ice and prayed it wouldn't crack and swallow her whole. She could feel his eyes burning a hole in her. She could almost see him from her peripheral vision. I see that you're not afraid of me, he finally said, watching her intently. Should I be? She cracked up, an eyebrow feigning innocence. Most people are. Well, most people want something from you, she continued smoothly. I already have what I want. I have a job I'm good at, a place that's starting to feel like mine, and a dog who worships me. What exactly would I be afraid of? Me firing you. If you fired me for telling you to fund arts education, you'd be an idiot, and I don't think you're an idiot. He made a sound that sounded like a chuckle, and to her shock when she stole a glance, he was actually laughing. Wait, she'd half expected him to eat her alive or possibly throw her out of his car and house, yet he found her courage funny. Goodness gracious. His laughter softened his features and hard exterior that he usually fronts, and right there, Jasmine caught a glimpse of the man underneath. She couldn't help but turn to look at him fully. He was staring back with those dark eyes that usually makes her heart skip a beat. Something crackled between them. In that instant, he stopped laughing, and the atmosphere became even more intense. I usually don't do this, he said. I agree, she replied, with no clue of what was being spoken about. I really don't know how to do this, he repeated. His voice came out rough in a way that made her want to volunteer to put him out of his misery, whatever it was that was slowly eating him up. Strangely, deep in her heart, Jasmine understood every word he said, just that she didn't want to admit it yet. They were moving at such a fast pace, more than she could process, and it felt like her brain hadn't caught up yet with the present situation. She slowly looked away, staring at the window, watching the car move through the city, and she thought about Benjamin Choi. I don't know how to do this either, she whispered finally. If that helps. His hand, resting on the seat between them, moved perhaps 2 inches, and rested directly on her laps. She took a deep breath and let him. It really helps, he said, watching her reaction. The driver turned onto the private road that led to the estate, and the gates opened as they approached. Jasmine Reeds and Benjamin Choi rode the last minute to his house in a silence, each lost in their own dark thoughts. He walked her to her suite door. It wasn't necessary, he didn't need to. The house wasn't large enough that she required an escort, but he did it anyway, and she let him too. The man had a crazy pull to him, which she found intoxicating. They stood in the hallway outside her door in the late-night quiet of the house, where the only light came from the low evening setting she'd programmed the corridor lights to. She had her key in her hand. Good night, Benjamin, she called out softly. He stood there very close enough that she could see the moment his dark, intense eyes moved over her face and settled on her lips. Jasmine, he said. She looked at him, suddenly tongue-tied. I don't want to be your employer tonight, he breathed, like it took a great deal of consideration to confidently say this out loud. I understand if that changes things between us. I needed to say it. She thought about the effect he'd had on her since the first day she saw him, and how much struggle it's been fighting her own traitorous emotion every single moment that he was near. Suddenly, she was tired of the countless emotional turmoil that rages within her, all because of him. Without thinking, Jasmine closed the distance between them and kissed him. He immediately picked the cue, grabbed her desperately and pinned her against the wall. He kissed her like he had been starving all these while and couldn't believe his favorite dinner had finally been served. His hands moved in places Jasmine didn't know could give her so much pleasure. She moaned his name against his lips as they crushed into her, receiving and giving back all at the same time. When she pulled back, they were both breathing hard, staring at each other like they couldn't believe this happened. Good night, Benjamin, she whispered, her voice husky from the intense kiss. Her knees were butter. It made her worry if she would be able to walk normally. He stood, looking at her like he really wanted to follow her into her room, or better, take her to his and do glorious things to her body all night long. But he gave himself the decency that making such a move would be too fast for her to handle. He didn't want her to start thinking of running away from him, not when he hadn't even started. Good night, he whispered back, his voice rough and thick with arousal. Jasmine nodded and went into her room. The moment the door closed behind her, she pressed her back to the closed door and listened to the sound of his footsteps going down the hall, rubbing her lip with her thumb and relinquishing the moment they just shared. It made her entire body lit up. Without being told, She knew that Benjamin was going to be such an amazing lover if she ever made it to his bed. Okay, let's pause for a minute. Before we go further, comment section is open and I'm watching. Are you team phone in bed, team laptop at work, or team living room TV? Tell me your team and where in the world you're reading from. I am personally replying to everyone in the first hour. And if you haven't hit like and subscribe yet, now is literally the perfect time because this story is going to get messy. Ready? Now let's proceed. She found him in the kitchen at 6:15. He was there before her, which was unusual. He typically didn't come down until she'd already started coffee. He was standing at the window with a cup she hadn't made, which meant he'd made it himself, which meant he'd woken up early and hadn't wanted to wait. He heard her come in and turned. For a moment, they just stared at each other in the early morning light, and Jasmine thought, here's where it gets awkward. Good morning, he finally said. Good morning, she flashed him a smile. I need to tell you something, he said. She braced herself for the impact. Last night, he said carefully, was not something I regret. I want to be clear about that. She exhaled. Okay. But I also need to be honest about the fact that I have no idea how to navigate this. He set down his coffee cup. I have spent my adult life not doing personal things. I'm better at, he gestured at the general concept of his existence, at this than at people. I know, she nodded slowly. You shouldn't know, he said. That's a terrible thing to know about a person. It's also an honest thing. She came to the counter and began making coffee. She needed to keep her hands busy if she was going to act normal while having this conversation. I'm not going anywhere, Benjamin, and I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm just, she paused, searching for the right way to say it. I'm here, that's all. I like being here. She could feel his eyes on her as she worked the coffee machine. Her inside knotted so hard that she was almost breathless. Jasmine. Yes. She pretended to get even more busy, her cheeks burning with emotions she didn't want out. I might get this wrong, probably multiple times. I'm patient. She took a sip of her coffee, and I'm very good at fixing things when they go wrong. He moved into her personal space, not touching yet, but his presence felt like a thick blanket wrapped around her. Also, she continued, if you get it really, catastrophically wrong, I'll tell you plainly and we can fix it. I don't intend to run away from you anytime soon, unless you give me reasons to. Thanks, he whispered, for staying and not running away at the first sign of trouble. I have been told that I have a very direct communication style, just so you're prepared. I've noticed, he nodded, flashing her a warm smile, since week 1. And yet you didn't fire me. Why would I even dare to do that? He looked at her like she'd just suggested something absurd. You're really good at your job, my dog adores you, and I... His expression got intense as he swallowed hard. In that instant, Kimchi appeared, distracting them both, and inserted himself between them with the lack of apology unique to Great Danes. And right there, the moment shifted into the familiar chaos of morning routine everyone was used to. Jasmine felt, for the first time in a long time, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The thing about Benjamin Choi, Jasmine was learning, was that he expressed himself through action rather than language. He was observant and had a way of paying attention to things and anyone that interested him. She had been doing that to him for weeks because he was boss. Nothing prepared her for the extra attention he's been giving her lately. He noticed, for instance, that she had her most creative thinking in the mornings. This was when her lists got done, her systems refined, her best ideas for the house materialized, and he began, without announcement, letting her run the house the way she deemed fit in the mornings. There were no more instructions. He just let her do what she wanted, the way she pleased. And because Jasmine was so good at her job, he ended up realizing that she does a better job than he would have asked for, usually impressed with the result, and tells her as loud as he could. He noticed that she was currently reading her way through a stack of library books on landscape design. She developed a genuine interest in the garden, and one morning a book appeared on her desk in her suite. It was a beautiful hardback on traditional Korean garden aesthetics, with a card in his handwriting that said only, "For your growing interest in gardening." He noticed that Fridays were hard for her. She'd mentioned once, offhandedly, that she'd lost her previous apartment on a Friday, so she usually has this ambient anxiety on Fridays, and he started, without mentioning it, scheduling treats for her on Friday evenings. A food delivery from a restaurant she'd casually mentioned. He'd make out time to cuddle up with her, in the living room so they can both watch a good movie. Any movie of her choice. He hadn't made any move on her since that gala night. She was too precious to mess with, and he was taking his time to get to know her better, without rushing things between them. In the same way, Jasmine was learning him too. She learned that he'd eaten a particular childhood food, a specific type of rice cake his mother made that he'd mentioned once. In one of the early morning conversations, she suspected he'd forgotten that they had. She somehow managed to find a recipe and perfected it. She made the food one Sunday morning and left it for him, with a note that said, "Thought about while making this." Benjamin ate all of it. He even made it weird by going to search for her. He finally found her in the kitchen. "How did you manage to make that?" he started. "I did my research." She flashed him a shy smile. "Jasmine." "Huh," she said gently. "Thank you," he whispered, overwhelmed with emotions. Their first actual fight happened the next day. It happened over something almost small. She'd rearranged his study. Well, she'd been planning to do that for some weeks now. She had been observing his space and had a very clear theory, why his workflow was suffering, which was that his desk faced the wrong direction, and that the afternoon light came in at an angle that created glare on his monitor between 2 and 4, which was also the period in which Mr. Park had once said his error rate, although usually infinitesimal compared to an average person, was still highest. She had moved the desk 15 degrees and shifted 2 bookcases to create a better flow, and then she left for a quick grocery shopping, feeling pleased with herself. She came home to find him standing in the study doorway with an expression she'd never seen on him before. He was furious. "You moved my things," he accused her, the moment she stepped inside. She took her coat off. "I was only trying to improve your study. The light was." "This is my space," he cut her short. "You don't touch my space without asking." "I ask before I touch everything else in this house," she said, keeping her voice even. "I've been operating this entire household with your explicit input for months. The study is mine." He was finished, with a barely controlled temper that almost scared her. "I don't care about light angles or workflow or whatever metric you used to justify it. It was mine, and now you changed it." She stood there, staring at him, confused how such a small adjustment could make him this furious. Her instincts told her that this wasn't just about the desk. Something must be terribly wrong somewhere. "Benjamin," she said quietly, "it's okay to say you don't like things getting changed without warning. You don't have to be so furious in a scary way." He immediately went still, the steam dissipating automatically from him. "The study was yours and I moved it without asking, and I totally understand if that felt like a violation," she continued. "I should have asked. I'm sorry. I'll put it back." She tried to head towards the study to do exactly that, but his voice stopped her when he said, "Leave it. The new arrangement is probably better." "But that's not the point if you—" "Jasmine," he called her name, "leave it." And he paused. "I'm sorry I lashed out this way. It wasn't just about the desk." She stood there watching him. "The truth is that," he ran his hands through his head, "I find it difficult when my things change without my knowledge. I've been trying to adjust since we became close. I'm aware this is a me problem, and it has nothing to do with you. You know you can always tell me how you want things done around here. You don't need to put yourself under too much pressure, trying to make me feel more at ease around you." She held his gaze. "That's all you have to do. Tell me, and I will understand. I'm very good at not doing things that hurt you if I know what they are." He stood there, staring at her with those dark eyes. Then, without a word, he crossed the room, and before she could process what he was up to, he kissed her. Her body reacted before she did, melting into his warm embrace and giving herself to him. Gosh, she had missed this so much and never wanted it to stop, even if one of the staff walked in on them. She opened up. When his tongue knocked, kissing him back with the same energy he gave. When they finally tore apart, she rested her forehead briefly against his and said breathlessly, "I understand that we're going to have more fights." Probably, he agreed, slightly rough. And you're going to be terrible at them. I agree, he chuckled and said, but like you said, I would communicate better. Perfect, you seem like such a fast learner. She teased him, allowing him to place a kiss on her forehead that sent searing heat down in the spot between her legs. He then wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her tightly towards him, taking in her natural sense. He was totally consumed by this woman, God help his soul. He had never acted like a teenage boy in love until she walked into his life. Now he wasn't letting this good woman go. If she said they were going to communicate, then that's what they are going to do from now on. Point blank. Under normal circumstances, Benjamin would have sacked his housekeeper for messing with his things, but not this time around. The call came on a Sunday. Benjamin's usual 8:15 call with his mother, which Jasmine had told, usually happens in his study, with a low cadence of Korean she'd learned to recognize. This particular Sunday, the call went longer than an hour. When he emerged, he had the look of a man who had negotiated something and lost. My parents are coming to dinner, he announced to her with a dreadful expression. Next Saturday. Jasmine, who was making her grocery list for the week, quickly glanced up. Okay, do they have dietary restrictions? They want to meet you, he told her. Her pen immediately dropped from her hands. My mother, he tried to explain, with the expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered by someone much smarter, has apparently been speaking with Mr. Park. Our own Mr. Park, Jasmine repeated carefully. Yes, he nodded. Mr. Park has apparently been providing my mother with weekly updates about my life since 2019, because they have a friendly relationship that I was unaware of until approximately 15 minutes ago. Jasmine allowed her brain to process the gravity of what they were discussing. What kind of updates? Enough updates, he shrugged. That made my mother refer to you as the woman who finally made me eat breakfast. Jasmine stared at him without really seeing him. Her heart was beating fast when she said, I see. She even used the word, finally, with such significant emphasis, like she couldn't wait. She really wants to meet me, she managed to ask. Yes, she wants to meet you, he confirmed. My father will also be there, though I suspect primarily as a witness. Benjamin, she looked at him, are you okay with this? His expression softened. I told her about you, he said. 2 weeks ago. That was before she called Mr. Park to get the full gist, I believe. She blinked. You told your mother about me. I told her I'd met someone. He nodded. I told her you were, he paused, picking the right words, his expression vulnerable, extraordinary. Those were my exact word. Jasmine glanced back at the grocery list. She was going to save her reaction for her private moments, when she was finally alone. That is when she would allow herself to proper process this new development and maybe react. Just in case Mr. Park walks in or eavesdropping from somewhere close, to avoid giving him more information material to feed Mrs. Choi. Right now, Jasmine needed to replan the entire grocery list. What does your mother like to eat? She asked, genuinely curious. He blinked. Why? He'd been anxious since that phone call, half expecting to see a reaction from the news he'd just told her, because her reaction would determine if he will really delay his parents from coming over. Negative means he's going to cook up an excuse for his parents why he wouldn't be available. Instead, she was there, acting all normal like his parents were regular guests she'd served before. Because I'm making dinner for your parents and I'd like it to be good, she replied. What does she like? The expression he gave her was one that she decided was going to stay with her forever. It said, I don't know what I did to deserve you. Then he said, she likes a good meal made with love. She's that thorough and she can always tell. Good, Jasmine said. Then she'll like what I'll make. She slowly picked up her pen and began adding to the list. She knew he was watching her, with the way heat traveled through her body and the hairs at the back of her neck standing erect, but she wasn't going to get distracted with the task ahead. She was good at this job, and she wanted his parents to know. And it had nothing to do with the fact that she was romantically tied to their son. Mrs. Choi arrived ahead of her husband, which Jasmine would later understand was strategic rather than accidental, and swept into the entryway with the air of a woman conducting an inspection that she was politely pretending was a social call. Then she stopped in front of Jasmine, taking her in with sharp eyes that did not miss any details. Jasmine, who had spent the entire 29 years of her existence being stared at by people assessing her, so she allowed herself be looked at. Then Mrs. Choi smiled warmly, in a bit victorious way, and said, in accented English, "He said you were extraordinary. Didn't even know that he had such great taste." Jasmine felt her cheek heat up. She hadn't expected the compliments. "Thank you, Mrs. Choi." "Call me Sonia, please, I insist." "Sonia," she returned the smile. "Please come in. I've heard a great deal about you, too." "Good things, I hope." Both women smiled, liking each other. "He talks about you every Sunday," Jasmine said. "I've noticed that you always call at 8:15 without fail. He mentioned that you've been doing it for 34 years, and that whichever part he was in the world wasn't an excuse." Sonia's eyes, bright and sharp, moved to her son, who was standing slightly behind Jasmine with the expression of a man watching a situation develop in ways he cannot control, and her smile deepened. "I like her," she announced to the room. Benjamin's father, Robert Choi, Korean-American, second generation, quiet and measured where his wife was dynamic, arrived 2 minutes later, shook Jasmine's hand, and said, "My wife has spoken of nothing else since she heard about you." "I've only said good things," Sonia beamed, playfully tapping her husband. "Yes, my dear, all good things," Robert agreed. "She did also say she would be asking you the questions she hasn't been able to ask our son for 3 years, so I want to apologize in advance." "Now, that's private information and you're not supposed to tell her that." Sonia pouted, although she was nowhere looking embarrassed. "You told me that piece of information, right in front of about 40 people," Robert said with a serene expression. "So forgive if I had no idea that it was supposed to be a secret." Benjamin closed his eyes for one brief second, mentally praying to the heavens to save him from any further embarrassment his parents would cause. Jasmine smiled. She was enjoying the older couple banter, but she needed to do her job regardless. So she suggested they move to the sitting room, flashing a warm smile in Benjamin's direction. Dinner was good. She knew it was good because she'd made it good. She'd researched the recipe, then she'd executed it into perfection. Sonia ate everything and asked about the seasoning 3 separate times, which Jasmine recognized as the highest available praise from someone who took cooking seriously. Robert talked to Benjamin about the company, and then, with a smooth tone that has clearly been inherited by his son, shifted to asking Jasmine about her background, her degree, her work history, the hospitality management path she'd chosen. She answered honestly, including the part where the Hartwell family relocating to London had upended her life plan, and Robert nodded with a satisfied expression of a man who respected people who'd navigated hard things without complaining about them. Sonia, who had been listening while appearing to be focused on her food, said, "And now you're here." "Yes, I'm here," Jasmine agreed. "And I've been told that he's different now," Sonia said, without mentioning the name of her source. "I didn't think that he would warm up to anyone except his dog." "Mom," Benjamin called out quietly. "I am his mother," Sonia continued, ignoring him. She held Jasmine's gaze. Since Benjamin took his first step, he had always had this character of working extra hard to not needing anyone. He's so good at pushing people away. And you, my dear, have been able to break through those absurd thick walls he'd erected around himself. Her eyes glistened as she smiled warmly at Jasmine. "Thank you for everything," she whispered, picking a soft, perfumed white handkerchief to dab her eyes. Jasmine glanced at Benjamin. He avoided her eyes, convinced that his mum had finally embarrassed him in front of the girl he was falling in love with. He pretended to be engrossed in his plate, even though he knew clearly that Jasmine was staring at him. Then he paused when heard her say, "I genuinely think that he's easier than he acts," Jasmine continued softly. "Once you learn his language." The table went quiet for a long moment. 3 pairs of eyes, staring simultaneously at Jasmine like she'd passed a life-changing declaration. Robert recovered firstly and said, "She does have you wrapped around her fingers, son. Now I see why," he patted Benjamin at the back. In that instant, Benjamin looked up, and across the table his eyes found Jasmine's, and used his eyes to confess volumes of his love for her. No one else understands him the way she does, and he was really grateful. Sunyi saw that exchange and understood everything her son was communicating. She hoped that Jasmine understood too. Choosing not to ruin the moment with another embarrassing childhood story, she picked up her wine glass and smiled to herself. After dinner, while the men were in the sitting room with coffee, Sunyi found Jasmine in the kitchen. "Can I help?" she asked. "No, thanks. You're a guest," Jasmine tried to say, but she cut her short. "I am his mother and I wish to speak to you privately," Sunyi said cheerfully. "Let me help with the dishes." Jasmine nodded and handed her a towel. They both worked in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Sunyi suddenly said, "He had a difficult time after his last relationship. He's usually reclusive, but after that episode, he shut down very completely. I was really worried," she paused. "He's gotten really good at being alone, and it comes too easily to him." Jasmine dried a serving bowl. "I've noticed. I always knew that someday, someone special will come along and crack those walls. I never stopped praying," Sunyi said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears that were starting to form. He needed someone who wouldn't put too much pressure on him, but allow him to warm up to her and change gradually. She made a small gesture. "Someone who's going to stay." "I'm not going anywhere if that would help," Jasmine said. "Thanks, dear," Sunyi glanced at her with a vulnerable expression. "He had never allowed us to have dinner with anyone he was seeing. That was why I had to find other means of gathering information about him. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say." Jasmine nodded and said softly, "I do." She understood perfectly. "I also have not," Sunyi continued with a warm smile, "seen him this happy in years. At dinner, when you said he was easier than he looked, he smiled like he had hit jackpot, and I saw those hidden messages you both exchanged. I think my son loves you." She reached out and gently patted Jasmine's back. "I'm glad you both found each other." Then she turned back to the dishes, like she didn't just unload an entire tsunami of secrets on Jasmine. Jasmine stood dazed, her brain overwhelmed with so much information. She hadn't allowed herself to start thinking about love yet, and here was Benjamin's Choi telling her that she could tell that her son loves her. Sunyi, unaware of the effect of what she just said, carefully placed the last place and then glanced at Jasmine, who was standing there motionless. Then she said, "Now tell me what you used in that sauce. I've tried, but somehow, I cannot figure it out and I really want to recreate that dish." Jasmine smiled and told her. The house smelled like garlic and something close to disaster. Jasmine stepped through the front door, dropped her bag, and immediately knew two things. One, Benjamin Choi was in the kitchen, and two, she should probably make sure the fire extinguisher was accessible. Kimchi launched himself at her from the entryway, all 90 kilograms of Great Dane, who had apparently decided on day one that she was his actual person. The rest of the world were merely Dacre. She caught him with both hands and scratched behind his massive ears. "Is your dad burning down the kitchen again?" she asked him. Kimchi licked her face with zero apologies. She straightened and followed the smell. What she found was not a disaster she'd expected. That was the first surprise. Benjamin Choi stood at the stove with a recipe printed out in front of him. It was actual paper, like he'd taken Tay recipe too seriously enough to print it out, and the kitchen showed real preparation. There were measured ingredients in little bowls like a cooking show. The non-stick pan was on medium heat, which meant he'd actually researched about non-stick pans, and billionaire Benjamin Choi was making her dinner. She stood in the doorway and let that new piece of information settle over her. He heard her heels on the tile and turned, and she watched his face lit up, like it always do, these past days whenever he spots her. "You're early," he said. "By 4 minutes. I wasn't expecting you this early, was thinking I still had time." She crossed the kitchen and stood beside him, looking closely at the printed recipe. The vegetables were mid-cook. The seasoning was laid out with careful precision. She caught him staring at her with an adorable expression. "You're doing very well," she said. He returned to the pan. "It's pasta, Jasmine, not a rocket science, but thanks anyway." She giggled. "I think it's more than rocket science, especially since it had to do with your cooking skills." She teased him. "Don't ruin the moment with your fake with humility. I know that you don't really mean it." His mouth curved into a smile, his eyes twinkling with a hint humor he was trying so hard to stifle, until he couldn't anymore, and collapsed into bouts of loud laughter. Benjamin knew without being told that this awesome, beautiful lady knew him far too much than anyone else, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. Jasmine did not take over. She just stood beside him when he needed to know if the water was boiling enough, answered his questions by tilting her head at things rather than explaining them too much, and let him cook her dinner in his own chaotic, over-researched, endearing way. The meal came out not too perfect, but it's the thought that truly matters, right? The vegetables were slightly overcooked. The pasta was 3 minutes past al dente. The sauce turned out not really bad. It was the best meal he'd made in years, and she appreciated his efforts. She told him so. He gently took his hands and kissed them. "Jasmine," he called softly. "Huh," she glanced up from her plate. "I don't want you to be my housekeeper anymore." She froze, wondering where this was headed. Is he about to sack her? The thing about Benjamin Choi was that when he decided to say something, he said it with his whole chest. He doesn't believe in beautifying words or cushioning their effects. She'd wanted to hate this about him in the beginning. Instead, it had become the thing she loved most in her growing collection of things she loved about him. He paused and started again, like he was trying to choose his words. "I want to stop pretending this is a professional arrangement with personal complications. I want you here because you want to be here, not because it's your job." She thought about the negative $43 she had in her bank account 4 months ago. She thought about the crazy way she'd rehearsed her interview answers on the bus, because she'd been so sure she wouldn't get this job, and she'd been completely wrong about all of it. "You'd need an actual housekeeper," she finally said. "This house wouldn't be able to run by itself." "I'm fully aware," he nodded grimly. "Someone good. I'll interview the candidates." "Of course you will," he said warmly. "And I'll need a new living situation," she tried to say, but he cut her short. "You can stay," he said it quietly. "The suite is yours anyway, if you still want it." She paused, the pasta suddenly forgotten. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "Probably very badly," he shrugged, "but yes." She thought about what she'd said to her best friend, Tanya, months ago. Jasmine had sworn that nothing was going to happen between her and her billionaire boss, but she's been so wrong and loves every bit of it. "Okay," she nodded. He blinked. "You're okay with everything?" "Yes," she beamed, flashing him a full smile. "But what about my salary?" "I will place you on a lucrative allowance. You wouldn't need to work another day for the rest of your life. But if you choose to work somewhere else, I wouldn't stop you." Before she could react, he leaned over and kissed her in the kitchen, whispering words of gratitude how she'd made his life so much easier, and he was sorry in advance. Because he was never letting her go. Kimchi must have fallen asleep nearby in the corner, obviously bored from this great show of affection they were both displaying. November in Seattle arrived like it owned the place, which it did, dropping cold and dark relentlessly over the city with the casual authority of a season that knows it has months to spare. The house was warm. Their relationship had progressed into stolen moments of intense makeout whenever they were sure no staff was near. He'd somehow managed to make her spend a few nights in his room and made sweet love to her all night. Jasmine was perfect in his arms. Benjamin had almost wept from adoration each time he thrusted, and she moaned his name in pleasure. Their life was finally perfect, except that there was a huge problem. The problem was the company. A hostile takeover bid had materialized from a European investment firm. The move had been quiet and vicious, and without realizing it, Benjamin disappeared into his work in the way she'd watched him disappear into things before. They still made love whenever they could, and he was the most passionate lover she'd ever been with. He has a way of making her feel gloriously sore and well spent in the right places. These days, he was at his desk by 6 every morning, and he was usually there past midnight. He ate the food she left for him with the focus of someone fueling a machine, thanked her with his hands and his voice, and then dove right back into work. She let him. She knew better than to crowd him when he was in his problem-solving mode. He needed space the way some plants needed cool temperatures to bloom, and she was smart enough to give it. But God, she felt the distance. He was retreating physically away from her, They didn't spend those memorable moments of laughing at whatever horrible jokes he'd made. She had come to realize that they weren't just lovers, he was her friend too. And she misses their friendship terribly. She'd cracked down that wall he'd erected around him, over 4 months, and there was no way she was going to allow this takeover bid that consumed him to build up those walls against her again. On the 3rd week, she brought coffee to his office at 11 p.m. and carefully set it down on the desk without a word. Then she sat on the edge of the desk and waited, because she'd learned that silence was sometimes the most useful thing she had. After a long moment, he confessed quietly, "I might lose it. The company. Majority stake. If they acquire another 3% before the board meeting," his jaw tightened. 10 years of my hard work would be gone. My father built 20 before I inherited it. It's not just... He looked at trembling his hands. He was having an almost nervous breakdown. Those years are not just numbers in an account. "I understand," she whispered, her heart reaching out to him. "I had the data, but I missed the signal." He was blaming himself now, making her chest ache even more, watching Benjamin. Her own Benjamin act like this was a huge struggle. "Stop, please," she pleaded desperately. He glanced up, surprised to see her. He had been so lost in thought that he had no idea she'd entered his office. She held his eyes steady, even though what she really wanted to do was to hug him and kiss him and promise him that everything was going to be all right. But that would be all lies, and he wouldn't even buy it. So she did the only thing that came to her mind. Jasmine straightened and tried to talk sense into his brain. "Stop standing in the hole looking at how you fell in." She called him out bluntly. "You're brilliant. I've watched you work for 4 months. I know exactly how brilliant you are. I need you to stop focusing on the damage done and start thinking of what you need to fix this." Something flickered in his face. He hadn't seen her like this at all, and was somewhere between surprise and confused. Then she recognized that look he usually had. When he is focusing on solving a problem, she could almost imagine a light bulb coming ahead in his head. She'd seen it happen before, the way his eyes cleared when he suddenly had a brilliant idea. "I think I need to buy back the 3% before they do," he whispered weakly. "Can you?" she asked, urging him on immediately. Benjamin's mind works like a machine, if only he allowed it to. And she was here to make that happen, not just to receive pleasure strokes from him, late at night. "If I move fast enough," he supplied, deep in thought, probably already forming a plan. "Then move fast. What would it look like if you pull that move right now?" He suddenly sat up. Park needs to pull a specific set of shareholder contacts by morning. The legal team should be on a call at 7 a.m. "Done. I'll make sure Mr. Park's phone is charged and his calendar is clear." She stood. "And you are sleeping 4 hours before that call, which means whatever you're doing right now ends at 2 a.m. sharp. Are we clear?" "I may need to," he tried to protest. 2 a.m., she said flatly. "That's my condition for the 7 a.m. coffee." He glanced at her, allowing her to catch a glimpse of how exhausted he was, of the entire affair. "Come here," he called quietly, gently pulling her towards him into a tight hug. God knows he couldn't get enough of this woman. He placed his nose on her neck and breathed in her natural scent, his favorite of course. Then he pulled back, staring at her. "You're remarkable, you know that, right?" he murmured slowly, caressing her lower lip. It wasn't a question because when she opened her mouth to reply, he leaned in and kissed her. His lip hit hers, warm and firm, his arms wrapped around her waist. Jasmine wanted to melt into his embrace, allow herself to enjoy everything he was willing to give, right here in his study. But she knew that she needed to be the sane person in this situation, because he was definitely losing his mind already. It took a great restraint, but she managed to pull out of his embrace, stepping back before it got intense. "I mean it. You are packing up at exactly 2:00 a.m. And you are going to need a good rest tonight. You need as much as you can squeeze in." He tried to grumble, but she placed a thumb on his lips and left him alone before he could grab her. Benjamin was at his desk until 1:43. Then he came to bed. She knew because she checked. Tanya arrived on a Saturday, and she came loaded. Jasmine met her at the door and immediately read the situation. Tanya James, in a bright yellow coat, standing in the estate's entryway with her hands on her hips and an expression that was somewhere between best friend warmth and barely contained fury. That says, "I cannot believe you've been sitting on this." Jasmine Reeds, Tanya said, with a voice that was dangerously calm. How could you keep all these away from me? Hi, Tanya. Jasmine tried to greet her best friend innocently. Do not hi Tanya me. She held up her, blocking Jasmine from hugging her. She gasped as her gaze caught the entryway behind Jasmine, the staircase. Her eyes widened as she took in the sheer square footage of the art. Her mouth fell open, then she screamed. Jazz, what the hell? I was going to tell you, she tried to explain. You were going to tell me when? Oh my God. Tanya walked past her into the entryway, turning slowly in a full circle. You were going to tell me that you have been living in a literal billion-dollar estate with a hot billionaire. And from what I can tell from your boring text, you've fallen heads over heels in love with him. She turned to face her. When were you exactly going to tell me, huh? Tina, you don't need to shout it this loud, Jasmine whined. The situation here is kind of complicated. Girl, I don't believe you a bit. It was not complicated. You have my number, you have my address. I even offered you a one-way ticket back to Atlanta when you thought you weren't going to get the job. Instead, you got this. She gestured sweepingly at the entire house, and somehow went mute on me, giving me boring clues on how your life had been lately. I was starting to get really worried. In my defense, Jasmine raised her hands in mock surrender. There is no defense, girl. Tanya smiled and crossed the room, hugging her best friend with such sheer force of someone who had missed her favorite person in the whole wide world, and couldn't bear a second longer staying apart, and that was why she was here. Jazz, I'm so glad you're okay. I was really furious at you and worried at the same time. I'm so sorry, Tanya, Jasmine apologized. I was so caught up with everything in this house. So where is he, the hot boss? Tanya. I need to see him immediately, for assessment purposes. Benjamin, who had heard the commotion and a bit of their exchange, suddenly appeared from the direction of his study at that instant moment, like he'd been literally summoned. He was wearing dark jeans, a simple gray pullover, looking effortlessly put together and hot, in the exact way Jasmine had described him. Tanya went very still, her sharp eyes, tracking him down in full-blown assessment that would put the CIA to shame. Jasmine watched her best friend assess Benjamin and struggled to not let out a loud laughter. Some people never change, do they? Her best friend had always been extra protective about her, and she couldn't help but notice her doing the same thing she'd always done since high school when boys started bothering them. Tanya was a best friend and a big sis all in one. Benjamin Choi, Jasmine said enthusiastically. This is Tanya James, my best friend. Mr. Choi, pleasure to meet you. Tanya acknowledged him, obviously finding him satisfactory in her assessment. Ms. James, he replied, watching her. Jasmine speaks about you constantly. I hope she only says good things about me. She teased, clearly thrilled that her best friend remembered to talk about her. Yes, he nodded, picking up the humor. She described you as the only person she's ever met who can be both completely right and completely unhinged at the same time. Tanya turned to Jasmine. I like him already, she announced. He can stay. He lives here, Tanya. Good for him, she turned back to Benjamin. I have a list of questions for you. I assumed, he said, flashing her a confident smile while guiding them into the sitting room. Mr. Park has arranged coffee. Tanya immediately followed him. She turned once to look back at Jasmine with an expression that says, oh my gosh, girl, I need 6 hours alone with you after this. Jasmine shook her head smiling and followed them both. Tanya's interrogation lasted 45 minutes and was impressively rigorous, even Jasmine had to admit. She bluntly asked about his intentions towards Jasmine. Those exact words made Benjamin blink, and then answered with complete seriousness, as though Tanya's question was the gateway to seal the deal. Actually, I wasn't looking for love when she arrived, he said. I'd learned to expect very little from the people I employed, but days later, spending some time with her, I realized that she was the one. Then Tanya leaned forward. I'm going to say this once. Jasmine Reeds is one of the best people on this earth. She is extremely loyal and a good girl because that's who she is. She can't help it. Don't mess this up, or else I'm coming for you. I don't intend to, Benjamin nodded. Thanks for the warning. Jasmine looked away, hiding how these two of her most favorite people in the whole world were making her feel. She glanced at the ceiling, blinking hard. She was not going to cry, not here in the sitting room, with Tanya and Benjamin watching. She was a grown woman, and big girls don't cry, right? Kimchi strolled in and put his enormous head in Tanya's lap, distracting everyone and saving Jasmine. "This is a big dog," Tanya exclaimed, pleased with Kimchi's friendliness. "His name is Kimchi," Jasmine said. Her voice came out still cracked and emotional. At least she wasn't feeling like crying anymore. "Ooh, a cute name for such a big dog." Tanya scratched his ears, making Kimchi lean in more to her touch. Over the top of his head, without pausing, she flashed Jasmine an expression that said, "We are going to talk about every single inch of this later, when he goes to bed." She hadn't meant to see the email. She was carrying his laptop from the sitting room to his study. He'd asked her to drop it off. It was a simple request, and she didn't mind at all, because she had done it 100 times. The screen had lit when she picked it up, and the subject line caught her eye, right before she could look away. "RE, Choi housekeeper background check request." She slowly set the laptop back down on the coffee table. Her heart was beating in a chaotic rhythm. Taking a deep breath and dreading what she might find, Jasmine picked the laptop again, opened it, and read that email. It was a standard background check on her, of course. What else would it have been? Gosh, what was she even thinking? Jasmine mentally scolded her eyes, although her eyes couldn't stop reading the emails. She noticed that the chain continued. There was a follow-up 2 weeks in from a private investigator, and then, a month after she'd arrived. Ray, Jasmine reads, previous employment ended not by family relocation, as stated. Hartwell Industries closed its domestic services division due to financial restructuring. I recommend confirming from the housekeeper whether the misrepresentation of the entire situation was intentional. She quickly shut the laptop, like it was a ball of fire, and sat, anxiously rubbing her temples as she processed this new information. The Hartwell family had not moved to London. They'd restructured. That means she'd been laid off. She'd only told the white lie to the agency about her former employees relocating, because being laid off had felt like failure, and she was sure no serious employer would want a housekeeper whose former employees had thought she did so badly at her job that she got laid off. Jasmine felt trapped. It had all been a lie, and he had finally found her out. Maybe that was why he even asked her to get the laptop in the first place. Benjamin had known, possibly for months. She slowly found her way to his study, her mind occupied with dreadful thoughts. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and his expression shifted immediately. He noticed she wasn't okay. She'd never been able to successfully hide anything from him since they became lovers. "From the look on your face, I have reasons to believe that you've read your background email in my laptop," he asked immediately. She stepped into his study and closed the door. Jasmine nodded slowly. "The screen opened when I picked up the laptop." Her voice came out unsteady. She couldn't justify why she'd lie to get the job if he decides to ask her. "I wasn't looking for it. I swear," she finished. "It's okay," he replied, leaning back on his chair to study her. "I should have cleared that chain. I wanted to, then I forgot." "Why didn't you ask me about it?" He locked eyes with her and said casually, like he was discussing the weather, "Because I already knew." "You knew?" She stared back in disbelief. "All these while?" He nodded. "The relocation story you mentioned had inconsistencies. Any reasonable person with a head on their shoulders could spot at the moment you said it. You're many things, dear, but you are not a good liar. So I had to get it checked, out of mere curiosity, because you earned the job." He paused, still studying her. "I found out about the desperate situation you were in financially when you came for the interview, and I understood why you framed it the way you did." "And you hired me anyway?" she asked, unable to believe her ears. "I told you that you earned the job because you were the best candidate I'd seen in 2 years. A pause. "And the lie, if we're calling it that, was about shame. Not like you robbed your former employee or committed a crime. You were only trying to protect yourself. I've used worse methods to protect myself, too." She crossed her arms. "You should have called me out or said something all these while." He raised his eyebrow as a silent question. "Can't believe that you let me think you didn't know all this while, for 4 months. She was breathing hard, struggling to keep her cool. We even got intimate, and you didn't care to bring it up in. I didn't think it was necessary, he replied before she could finish. Why did you cover up so much, even though you could see through me? He was quiet for a moment, then he said slowly, I kept quiet because I was afraid. She paused, without a word, and he repeated it again, slowly standing up and reaching for her. I was afraid that if I brought it up, you'd leave, and I had gotten so attached to you that I wouldn't dare if you hadn't brought it up. The tension between them crackled. Jasmine didn't know how and what to feel again. She was scared that her lie had been exposed, and then she was relieved that he'd dismissed it because of the bond they both share. It was really difficult feeling to process, and she didn't know what to do. She just stood there, staring at him. That was when it finally hit her. She was in love with Benjamin Choi. The realization landed like a packed punch in her gut. I'm really sorry that I lied to get this job, she apologized remorsefully. I was ashamed of being broke, and I didn't want to end up homeless and roaming in the streets. I should have done better. It's okay, babe. Benjamin stepped too close, close enough that she had to tilt her head to hold his intense